Vish speaking from the MIA HR team. Welcome to the call. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah, you're fine.
Great, thank you. So normally they say that in the training world that if you got a minimum quorum of 12 people, you're ready to go for a class, and we've got an online quorum of 716, so that's definitely good to go. All right, so my name is Vish, and I'm part of the MIA HR team, and we also have different kind of focus group teams within HR to focus on different areas of delivery for the business, and one of them is the Manager Excellence core team. So I'm part of that team, and you probably heard a lot from us lately with MYCI coming up. You had a call a couple of weeks ago. We have this call today. We will have the same call in March as well, in case you know anyone else you might want to recommend that this might be useful for, and so on. So there's a lot coming from us, and I hope you enjoy this. All right, so let me kick off. I want to kick off with a question to the group. There's a lot of content to cover, and I might just end up talking and covering for most of it, but let me open this question up to the group. And if everyone can see this picture closely, bright and clear on your screen. So this is a picture of a deer, and it's a snapshot at a point in time from, let's say, a video. If I were to fast forward this video by, say, 1 or 2 minutes, what would the picture show? So if I were to fast forward this video by another 1 or 2 minutes, what are the likely scenarios that exist for the deer, and what might that picture show? So to answer the question, if you can actually unmute your mics, introduce yourself and which country you're from, and no, talk to me, don't type. So unmute yourself and introduce yourself, which country you're from, and tell me what you think a minute or two after will happen.
Hey, this is Sharif from Egypt.
Hi, Sharif.
Hi, Vish.
So what would you see?
I see the picture.
A dead deer.
What would you see? A dead
deer?
Okay, a bloody dead deer. So that's scenario one. Any
No,
other?
I think a deer trying to stop.
So you think a minute or two later the deer gives up?
No, I think because this is a tiger, right?
This is a cheetah.
Right? Cheetah, okay.
Okay, others?
I think the deer doesn't know what to do.
Okay.
Okay, here I'm Babu from Ivory Coast. I think the deer will get away.
You think the deer will get away? So maybe a minute later you might see a bit of a big gap between maybe the cheetah, and the cheetah might have given up.
Yeah, cheetah will give up because these animals, these deer are very agile.
Okay. We still got a few shy people like Linda and Tariq are typing away. So Tariq says from BNO, cheetahs like deers as pets, they would take care of it. Okay.
I'm sorry, this is Isam from UAE. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do deer as I'm on my mobile.
Right.
So
you might just have to. No worries, no worries. Okay, one more last guess. Any scenarios? Any other scenarios?
This is Simon from Ivory Coast. It can be the opposite actually, the deer chasing the cheetah, because there is something more frightening ahead.
Okay, that's a very, very optimistic view, considering it looks like a pretty young deer, and you know they always try to go for the young ones, and because they're easy prey. All right, so look, if I were to, I actually didn't bring any awards, but if I were to bring an award, in this case, I would in my next trip to Africa, I would bring a small wooden carved deer and present it to Mr. Tariq Hijazi from Bahrain Oman. Tariq, you can speak now to declare your win. And well guessed. So this is...
I would have done the same.
You'd have done the same. All right. So, well, good guess. And for most of you, the others that called out, your speculations and your scenarios were probably very accurate as well. But this picture definitely shows that there's a bit of love here. So it's a bit of a surprise. So I just thought, I saw this picture a while back, and I thought, what an interesting picture, because it really highlights that, sort of we often as managers really always dive deep immediately into first instinct based on our patterns of past experience. Right, so they often get us to make the judgment calls, the decisions, which sometimes can be proven wrong. So we constantly need to unlearn and learn new skills, and hopefully today I can help you learn and apply some new models as part of your manager toolkit and as you work with your teams in the future. All right. So in terms of a very, very deep intrinsic purpose of, why, if I can say why we exist, in HR, and the sort of the core guiding principles of our little team around manager excellence in HR, supporting all of you out there in the field, is really to get a deeper understanding of what it takes to help you as managers move from being good managers to great managers. From being an M1, and we probably have managers on the call of all sort of breadths and experiences, maybe young managers who are new to role, leading small teams of maybe as few as 5 people, all the way to more experienced managers, and many of you will go through that in your career at Microsoft for many, many years, leading probably hundreds of people over a long-term career as a manager. And what we really want is to lay the foundation for yourself around building that legacy as a manager, and the experiences that you provide the people that currently report to you and will report to you in the future, and they have an experience that they say that you were a remarkable leader, you were their best boss, and that's really what we're trying to do here. In terms of resources, there was a bit of a logistics arrangement behind the scenes on this, so I'm not sure how it aligned all up at a EMEA level, but these are the resources that I will be using for the call today, and some of you actually might have that in front of you, and for those of you who don't, I definitely have shipped off these booklets across EMEA to all the HR leads. So depending on which country you are, you just need to ping your HR lead. If they haven't sent these to your local kind of HR business partner already, you can go and fetch it from them. So, some of you may have it, some of you may not have it, but it's okay, because I am actually, most of the content is on the slides, and the booklets are a resource for you in the future to actually use as part of your leadership toolkit. So there are 2 booklets here. The first is a team charter booklet, which is specifically more of a workbook around a team charter. So it's a very practical, usable workbook, while the other one, which is a bit more darker green, is the team performance booklet, which is probably where I'm going to spend most of my time today with you, with a couple of kind of page indexing as well along the way. You see the content is from a company called the Ken Blanchard Companies. And for most of you that have been a manager for a few years, you definitely would have been through either the face-to-face classroom situational leadership program, and now for a while we've had the e-learning situation leadership program as well that you can do. So just in case any of you have not been on situational leadership, I would really highly recommend it to you to kind of catch the next one coming around in the region, or even outside the region if you travel. So the Ken Blanchard organization is where situational leadership was born. It's actually quite an old program, I believe more than 20 years old, and they've refined it over the last couple of years. And what they've done is, as they build a model, they've built things around it. And we actually don't have some of the other pieces in Microsoft as a standard programmatic offering like situational leadership, and that's why I brought this together for you as a EMEA specific offering. So to my best knowledge, this is not available in CE right now, and they haven't got to the stage as well. So we are a bit ahead in EMEA, which is good, and we've got you the entire suite or the entire model around the team performance process, around building high-performing teams. All right. So all of you should by now know that the manager priorities got revised a couple of months ago, and these are your 3 Microsoft manager priorities: attracting and developing talent, delivering results through teamwork, and role modeling the Microsoft values. And the bulk of today's call will obviously focus mostly on number 2 priority for you, which is where you spend most of your time as a leader and managing a team. I also have with me, I can see lots of our HR colleagues as well, and I have worked with a lot of the HR teams, either directly with the client group or the LTs, or behind the scenes helping and supporting them land some of this content with the LT and their team. So this framework has been well received in Microsoft EMEA over the last 2 years, and we decided to scale this directly with all of you so that we can actually get you guys to be more involved in this. And you're still free to lean on your HR folks to help you support in any team offsite or process that you want to do in your office around facilitation. Okay, so let's get started. I'm missing my animations here, but oh, there it is. So there's basically in the model, it's a 5-step team performance process, and I'm practically going to walk you through each of the 5 steps. So please bear with me. And these are the 5 steps in a nutshell. The first one is what we call identify the gaps in the performed characteristics for your team. So here it is you as a manager working with the team members that report to you in looking at this acronym called PERFORM, which I'll expand in a few minutes, and actually doing a bit of an assessment and gap analysis around where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are. That then for you highlights very tangible areas of team development. The second stage in the process is around identifying the missing elements of your team charter. Again, I will go into the details of a team charter, what it stands for, what are some of the components that you can look at, and how it can help you. The third stage is around diagnosing your team's overall stage of development. Many of you know of different models around team development cycles or stages. We got the storming, norming, forming model as well. Ken Blanchard has a model here called team development stages, which I'll introduce you to as well. And that will help you understand where is your team on sort of the evolution, and how is it in step 4 you can match your leadership style using the appropriate leadership behaviors. So I'll talk a lot about flexibility around leadership styles, and that's probably, for those of you who have been on situational leadership, that little 4-colored quadrant will be something that you will recognize. And then finally, step 5 is kind of looking at all the outcomes that come from step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how you put it together into an action plan to help your team reach towards the ideal stage. And this is where I often say we mix it up and we bring things like the MS poll data, and we say, okay, how does everything come together? So we take the internal models, the internal data that we have, as well as some of these external frameworks that you can use. So let me again open it up to the floor here. And the first step is around, as I said, identifying gaps in the perform characteristics. And what is this acronym PERFORM? So, it really represents the 7 common characteristics that are found in all high-performing teams. So obviously Blanchard, being a global organization, they've done a lot of research around what are the characteristics that define a high-performing team. And this model can be a good activity for you to benchmark your team against that. So before I jump into what actually PERFORM stands for, here are 4 pictures of what I would regard as, of many examples out there in the world of high-performing teams. I want to ask you, as the audience, what do you believe are sort of the characteristics of a high-performing team?
Well, to start with, I think you can see common objectives.
Okay, so common goals and objectives, yeah.
Have to be in sync.
Have to be in sync, yeah. You can see that in some of these pictures here, absolutely.
Clear roles.
Clear roles, yeah. And you can, so what was sort of, it's also highlighted quite clearly in the F1 pit photograph, right? Everyone's kind of, the role distribution is really, really good, yeah.
Discipline.
Discipline, absolutely.
Trust.
Sorry?
Trust.
Trust, absolutely. And someone else says, Thierry says, good orchestration. Absolutely. So these are I intentionally wanted to use some kind of corporate examples for us to think of, great performances and great teams that work really, really hard to absolutely deliver outstanding results, and that's what where we want to get to, right, with your teams. So let me introduce you now to the PERFORM model. So as I said, it's an acronym, a 7-letter acronym that stands for the characteristics of a high-performing team, and the first one is the P, which actually stands for purpose and values. So what we mean here is that a high-performing team has very strong purpose and values, and that's the glue that holds the team together. A high-performing team will have a clear purpose around where they're going, the dedication, and the understanding towards reaching that ultimate goal. The E stands for empowerment. So here we're saying that high-performing teams have high levels of empowerment, and the teams have kind of the organization support and the practices in place to ensure that the team can effectively do its work. They have the information, they have the resources, they've got the decision-making sorted out, the boundaries, scope of authority, and they have access to the relevant information. So they have the things that they need in order to be successful at a team level as well as an organization level. The next one is R, which stands for relationships and communication. And here we say that high-performing teams have very strong internal, that is within the team, intra-team, and outside the team. They have very strong relationships and communications, whether it's internal within the team or the organization, or externally with the people that they serve their purpose. And also what we find is team members actively listen, team members find common ground. They have very good ways of addressing conflict when they do arise, and in a mature way. And they respect and appreciate each other's differences and are willing to work together, towards that common direction instead of having individual agendas. The F stands for flexibility, and here we're saying that flexibility is the ability to constantly adapt to changing conditions. So, at Microsoft, we constantly kind of tested on this, and we see that team members provide the backup and support to one another as and when needed. So in a highly flexible team, the characteristics are people share in the team development, people step up when the leader is not present, or they share the leadership, and they anticipate and readily adapt to changing circumstances in the future. The O stands for optimal productivity, which is really about the quality and the quantity of work. When productivity is optimal, teams consistently produce significant results. Your team will be committed to high standards, and your team will use effective problem solving and decision-making sort of processes to achieve their goals. The second R in the acronym stands for recognition and appreciation, which is around building and reinforcing kind of productivity and morale by focusing on the progress and the accomplishment of major milestones throughout the life cycle of the team. Recognition and appreciation often is misunderstood as something that just you as the manager have to give to the team, but it's actually also something which is a responsibility of the team members. So it's in a high-performing team, recognition and appreciation is not just top-down, it goes sideways, it goes upways, it's kind of in all directions. And in general, team members feel really highly, they regard working with your team and with that team. And finally, the last one, the M in the model, is morale. And morale is, as you know, is a kind of a sense of pride and satisfaction that comes from belonging to your team. That's when your people feel very confident, your people in your team are very enthusiastic, coming to work is not really, it's fun. It's not about working. It's about actually having fun. And everyone in your team would probably feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. And most importantly, the trust levels are very high. So I'm going to pause here for a second, just in case anyone has any points of clarification. But this is the kind of the 7 definitions of the characteristics of the high-performing team, called the PERFORM model. Crystal clear? Okay, I'll carry on. What I've also done is, obviously, I'm always very conscious of making external content relevant to the Microsoft environment, and here what I've done is I've looked at the MS Poll dimensions, which I know is very timely for all of you, considering MS Poll is live now, and very soon you will get your individual results. And the reason of timing this online training was to equip you with this while MS Poll was running, so that when MS Poll comes out, you can actually look at your results in combination with this model, and for you to apply together and take it forward with your team. What I also did is actually mapped some of the MS Poll dimensions against each of these, so you can see for something like morale on the left-hand side on the PERFORM definition, it maps across things like the work-life balance, job satisfaction, career development, and intent to stay. So some of them are MPI, MCI, WHI questions that actually I felt really map really well with the PERFORM model. So this hopefully is something really useful for you to consider as well, for you to take a deep dive in terms of that intervention with your team. Okay. The second step, as I mentioned, is identifying the missing elements of your team charter. So, if you have your books, it's kind of on page 6. But so, what really is the team charter? Can anyone tell me, what, historically, where have team charters been used in history outside of organizations? Any thoughts, anyone?
In the Army?
In the Army, absolutely. Good one, thank you.
In sport teams?
In sports teams? Yeah, absolutely, thanks. And you might have heard a very old charter called the Magna Charta. And that was also, sort of very early examples of very clearly identifying, what is the purpose, what is the activities that the team has agreed to do, whether it's a short-term team or it's a long-term sustainable team, and more importantly, how you'll do it. So it's not just about what the team has agreed to accomplish, but it's also how the team will accomplish that. And it's so well aligned to where, currently our performance review processes and our philosophy around the what and the how. So it's a great alignment to hold the team accountable to not just about results to deliver, but how they actually go about achieving that as an entire team. Sorry, my transition is a little bit slow. Hang on. Okay, so I'll quickly just let you enjoy that Dilbert clip, which is a private joke amongst all of us, not to be shared with your teams. Okay, so on the principle of being engaged, let me introduce you to some of the elements of the team charter. So, the team charter is as I said, it's kind of like looking at what the team does and how it actually achieves it. And some of the components that make up of it, as you can see here, is team purpose. So the first thing is really identifying, what is the team purpose? What do we need to be aligned to? What does the team do? Who does it do it for? And why is it important? So these are some of the key questions. I'll just repeat that. It's around, what does the team do? For who do we do it? And why is it important? So often, just defining the team purpose can take a lot of work from you. Some of the other elements here are what we call the team values and norms. And the team values and norms are combination of values which Microsoft has the organization values, but it can also be some add-on principles that guide the team's actions, which make sense and are relevant for the team. So you can build on top of the Microsoft organization values. And on the other hand, team norms are what we call ground rules for identifying appropriate behaviors for the team members. So you can see the combination of values and norms being very relevant, and the trick here is to customize it for your team, because the Microsoft kind of values are very broad and very all-encompassing, but it's really good to engage the team in a conversation around what really are the team's values and norms in your team, and sometimes that can be quite useful as well. The third area of the team charter is team initiatives. And that broadly, really are the areas of focus. What do we need to achieve? What are our goals? What are our roles? In many ways, it ties down back to the Microsoft commitments that you as a leader have for the team, and then the individuals that kind of make up the detail of your commitments and your delivery. Or it's often called the strategic pillars of focus, right? So you kind of have that already well articulated in your team. It's in our performance review cycle. It's in our commitment discussions. It's well covered. The next one is team practices, which is around three things: communication, decision-making, and accountability. And team practices are really the strategies and the processes that need to be clarified with team members and established in order for the team to get its work done. So communication is really around how we stay connected. I mean, in MIA we have a lot of virtual teams, especially in MIA HQ. How do we stay connected? How do we communicate? How do we keep each other's updated? What's the rhythm? What's the protocol? The second one is decision making. Again, defining the boundaries of how decisions will be made. People are in different locations. How do you come together to agree on common decisions? And finally, accountability is around establishing agreements for what the team members will hold each other accountable for. So, okay, I'll just carry on. And then finally, the resources are really the tangible materials and support that the team members need to kind of accomplish their goals. So the team charter, and then finally you can see the circle around it, is that the team charter is surrounded by the organization vision, purpose, and values. So again, when you think of something around creating your team charter, obviously you need to be aligned to the larger, whether it's a subsidiary organization vision, purpose, and values, or sort of a corp organization vision, purpose, and values. So from all of these elements, to be honest, with my experience working with some of the LT and their teams, not all of these are equally important. As I said, team practices sometimes are important, but I think this often is very well kind of run in Microsoft. Team initiatives, which is goals and roles, again, and I said, that's already in your commitments. That's quite clearly articulated pretty much at the start of the year. The space that I've seen where teams often need a little bit more time and investment from the leader is around the team purpose, and most importantly, the team values and norms. So that's just an FYI for you, sharing with my experience working with the teams. These are the two areas where the leader and their team spend a significant amount of their time. I'll just pause for any questions. Everyone's okay with that? Okay. Nice quote by Albert Einstein: if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. So, I'll show you an example a bit later, but sometimes something as simple as creating.
Hi, Vish.
Yeah. Hi, Helen.
It's Helen here. How long do you think team norms should last for, or how often should a team revisit the norms?
Okay, so normally, a good start is after MS Poll, when you've had a look at your results, and leaders normally present the results to the team. That's a good opportunity to take and put it in the mix and kind of do a small workshop with the team to identify some of these elements and do that. So as part of that, you'd identify the team norms. The norms normally, I would say, let's say have a shelf life of about 1 year.
1 year.
And what happens is, Another mistake teams make is that they'll list like 10 or 15 norms, right? And I'll show you an example as well. So the trick here for all of you as managers is that start small. It's good to identify, let's say, the top 10, but then you should commit. So for example, with the Gulf LT, what we've done is, a while back, we said, okay, we identified the top 10, and then we said, okay, what are the top 3 from a kind of like a stack ranking perspective? What are the top 3 that you really want to focus on over the next quarter? And then when you kind of have your next team meeting, you can assess the top 3 and have a discussion on how well are we tracking on the top 3. And if we're really doing really well at sort of 2 out of 3, I believe the 2 of them could fall off.
Okay.
It's a bit like, I guess, learning how to ride a bike. It's all about building the discipline, the habit, and eventually the behaviors that you want team members to inculcate. I mean, outside of Microsoft, I remember doing a team chart a couple of years ago, and sometimes something as simple as punctuality came up, where they said that team members are not punctual for team meetings. So that was just a simple discipline of something that was been going on for a long time, and probably the manager being okay for people to walk in like 5, 10, 15 minutes late. And that was happening over a period of time. So you can see over here on the slide, I put the last bullet point around that norms are often the opportunity to surface team tension and team dynamics. And when a leader puts on the table to say, okay, we want to talk about our norms and what are the behaviors that all of us as a team need to agree upon, it often brings up things that are often below the table. So maybe, I'm always late to meetings and the manager never told me anything, but, when we agreed as a team norm, I'm checking into contracting into being more punctual in the future, for example. So I would say, sort of from a long-term view, sort of a 1-year time span, and then go small, go baby steps, try to get the team to get the discipline of looking at no more than 3 norms and behaviors over a period of a quarter, review then look at your other 7 and see who fall off and what comes back on.
Thanks, Vish.
Yeah, great. Also, sort of the other 2 points over here on the top are, for you as a manager, this is the one area where you do need to do a little bit of prep work. So again, I've seen 2 extremes. I've seen an extreme where a manager will say, okay, let's all get into a room and we start from scratch. And the other extreme is a manager will do all of the work by himself, and he'll stand up and present the team charter to the team. So I don't need to ask you what's wrong with both pictures. The first one is where I believe the leader is not actually expressing his or her point of view. And the second example is the other extreme where the leader is just not involving or engaging the people, which relates to my previous cartoon from Dilbert. So you do need to prepare a draft version. You do need to think about what you believe as the leader of the group is the team's purpose, is the team's value system, and what sort of norms you as a leader would like to see in the team. And then you take that forward with your team in more of a collaborative workshop style environment where you present that as a draft and say, okay, let's actually now co-create this. And that's a good way to do that, because then they actually feel a sense of belonging because they actually created that with you as a leader, and that way accountability as well from a long-term perspective. People will hold each other accountable when they have actually created that, rather than the manager just kind of top-down running it. Okay, I'll just pause here. Any questions on this? Okay, so this is an example of an OEM workshop that I did in MIA. Sort of, I think it was one of my first kind of gigs that I did on this model with an Intacct team. And as you can see here, I mean, let's not critique what they went through, because you can see there's a lot of raw stuff I've left there intentionally to show you that just as a simple thing like the team purpose, with about, I think there were about 9 people in the team, and you can see how we went through 7 iterations before we actually got to something that they could actually work with. So, we got the teams to brainstorm, we broke them up, and we said, okay, what do you really believe is the team purpose? We showed them the Corp OEM team purpose, and they felt that that was a bit distant for them. They wanted to create something, a little bit closer to them for MIA. And eventually they went through almost 7 iterations to get it right. And eventually they said, okay, what we do, our purpose, is to grow demand for Microsoft-based devices by creating passion through our partners. And if you look at some of the commentary above, there were so many things that came out in that discussion, and through the process of elimination, they decided to go with the last one at the bottom. So this just shows you that, it's actually not an easy process when you get your team into a room and say, okay, let's see what our purpose is. Because often you'll find is that different people will think their purpose is different because they think much more individualistically based on the role that they play, and they don't see the big picture. Again, with the same team, an example of kind of team norms and values. Again, different examples from what I mentioned before. Here we have, we will meet upon...
Vish?
Yeah.
Just a question again. In a segment where you have multiple teams, would you advise if you go to your previous slide?
Okay, yeah.
So would you advise the teams to have their own individual kind of vision and mission, even though there might be a segment vision and mission?
Absolutely.
Or would you say, they must align themselves to the segment one?
Yeah, the good thing about a team charter is that you can even do it for a small project team. And you can scale it at an organization level. So it can go from a small team of 3-4 people running a project, working with sort of and influencing other people in the organization, all the way up to kind of an LT level. So absolutely, I mean, this is an example of an OEM team charter, not a CCG team charter. And if I were to do an RSM, and if I were to do sort of an OC or anyone else, it would be very different. So often, and that's where the disconnect lies, is that if in this case, the OEM leader, if he didn't take the effort to actually do this, a lot of the broader, more strategic CCG kind of team charter or vision elements would not always necessarily make sense for the OEM guy on the ground.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Anyone else? Any questions? This is a good time to just think about this and see how you might apply this in your team environment. Okay, so here's the values and norms once again. So what we have here is, this is just a very high-level snapshot of the values and norms. As you can see, they're very, very short and crisp statements. We will enjoy what we do, or we'll meet upon agreed upon timelines and deadlines. What's really important to do is click down one level here, and when team members identify these as the aspirational norms and values, it's very important to identify what behavior that will represent that, because that's where you hold them accountable, and that's when you can almost have a norms assessment in 6 months' time, which the team members actually assess. So imagine the team members have come up with team values and norms, and they themselves assess each other on, are these behaviors actually in place? Are we actually contracting to respect what we agreed upon? Okay, so here's something useful for you as well. As part of the team charter, there's 2 pages here, but this is what I call a team charter checkup, which is something you can practically just kind of print out and give to your team members, and you can do a quick assessment around each of the sort of the elements of a team charter that I walked you through, which again will give you that gap analysis. It'll tell you in a way you're strong and where you're weak, and immediately in that same workshop, you can get the team to fill it out, do a bit of a scoring, let's say 1 to 10, 10 being high, put it on a dashboard, look at the scores, and then from that identify the things that are low that you want to then focus your time on in the workshop or in the meeting. And then the ones that are high, obviously, are things that you want to recognize and celebrate. Just say, okay, it's really good to see that we are really good at the following things. So this is the first slide of the checkup, and here's the continuation. So you can see it covers the entire model, and you can see it goes into a lot more detail. It goes into team practices communication, team practices decision making, and team practices accountability as well. So hopefully this is something that can be, again, very practical and useful to you. Okay, moving on. We're in step 3 now. So step 3 is about diagnosing your team's overall stage of development. Now again, all of you are probably, as I'm talking, picturing scenarios of where your team is, where they've been, and over here the 2 variables I want to introduce you to is called productivity and morale. So in the Blanchard model, what they say is that high-performing teams kind of progress through a series of kind of stages, and each of these stages have 2 variables that fluctuate in level according to the stage. The 2 variables that fluctuate are productivity, which is around the quality and the quantity of work accomplished, and the second variable is morale, which is the sense of pride and satisfaction that comes from doing personal work and working with a team. So if you look at that in this model here, you can actually see how it builds up. And this model, funny enough, goes from right to left, not from left to right. Okay, and here you can see that there are in the colors there are different stages. There are 4 primary stages, which is orientation, dissatisfaction, integration, and production. And then, as I mentioned, some teams can be project-based teams, where when the project is finished, the teams terminate and they kind of disband. And so they have a kind of a 5th stage as well. You'll see at the bottom it says TDS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That stands for team development stage. And then in the middle of that, in the white section, you can probably see how the variables actually interchange stage after stage. So if you look at this in isolation, in orientation, which is kind of when teams are just coming together, normally they say that they find that morale is higher than productivity. And it kind of makes sense, right? A team has just formed together, they haven't really started producing results, the morale is high, but results and the quality and the quantity of work is still a bit low. Then there's also a stage called dissatisfaction. And in dissatisfaction, you'll see that the morale actually starts dipping. So that's often when there's a startup team, often this happens a lot in startup companies as well, where, a lot of kind of energy goes when the team or the organization is kicking off. And sometimes, a few months later, there's a bit of a dip. So this dip is what we call TDS2, or kind of the dissatisfaction phase. It's characterized by a lot of breakdowns in communication. People have are unable to kind of problem solve. They get stuck a lot in kind of solution finding. And sometimes if the leadership is weak at this stage, they often get quite self-critical. So the challenge at a sort of a stage 2 or dissatisfaction stage is for the leader to manage any conflict if there is, and really help the team to start lifting themselves up and really start celebrating kind of small wins, quick wins, early wins, to get them to see and lift that morale graph that you see that is dipping over there. The 3rd stage is the yellow one, which is TDS3, which we call integration. There you can see, I almost call it the recovery stage, and you can see that eventually now both the productivity and the morale is heading in the right direction. People, the characteristics of the stage often are where people start working together more. You can see that people are committed, they know what they need to do, the roles are clearer, they know how to work on the processes, and overall the team has more of a we approach rather than a me approach. So the growing team unity is something that you'll start seeing in the integration stage, which obviously then carries on into the future. Going into team development stage 4 is what we call production phase, and that's really where the team is functioning what I call at its optimal level, right? So that's where you see the perform characteristics that I mentioned, which are the sort of the perform stage. Is that's where you see that in action. People are delivering results. You're seeing a lot of closure. and overall the team is just productive. The morale is really high, and probably the challenge at stage 4. I mean, I know it's a really good stage, and I'm still saying there's a challenge, but it's very important for you as a leader to, celebrate the absolute success and the actual accomplishment of the team, but also make sure that performance is sustained over a period of time, because sometimes the dip comes again. And then finally, if you're managing a team where it's got a shelf life and it kind of has a 12-month or a 24-month cycle, it will come to a termination stage. And there you can see if that's the scenario for your team, we call it the termination stage, where you can see the variables, they start splitting, like they start forking. So morale may have a tendency to slip down, productivity may have a tendency to slip down, because people start getting a bit lazy and say, we're coming to an end, and they start anticipating sort of the close. They have a feeling, a sense of loss. So you really need to manage closure. And for you as a leader of the group that is managing a project that is going towards termination, is to just maintain productivity and morale as they move towards that closure. Don't let them, to use a cricket analogy, don't let the run rate fall down. Let them keep batting and hitting all the way through till the end. So I'll just pause here again if you got any questions. So this is diagnosis. So diagnosis is really the assessment of your team stage at any point in time. So you're probably thinking about where your team is right now. So I'll stop for a second. Any questions?
Maybe just a question from my side, Vish. It's Linda. I think often the question is, when a team is in a production phase, is how to keep the momentum up, or to maybe come up with the next big thing that keeps the team sort of occupied, the morale up, and sort of not becoming complacent. And have you got any tips around thinking around production, but not seeing that as the end of the team, but sort of trying to still keep the morale up and set some new objectives for the team? Have you got any guidance there?
Yeah. So there, a good thing for manager to start considering is that in the production stage, if you really have a high performing team, something that I would encourage you as a leader is to start what I call providing shared ownership. Shared leadership. So start sharing kind of your leadership with your direct reports, and start giving them opportunities to rise up and play a lead on a particular project, or do something as a stretch assignment, working with someone else in the team. So what you start doing there is you start building that capability across the team rather than just in the silo. So that's one strategy. Another good strategy is actually to let's say learn from experience. So learning from experience is really valuable, and often teams don't take enough time to learn from success or failure, for that matter. And often things like teaching others is a really good way of consolidating your own learning. When you're actually teaching someone, you really need to prepare, you really need to think through, you need to think about what you've done over the last 12 months, you need to think about, what are the tips, what are the tricks, what worked, what didn't work. So that deep dive into reflecting into your performance is a really valuable thing for team members to do, because then you have the time to probably inculcate these sort of kind of strategies among team members. What else? I mean, things like continuous improvement, so constantly raising the bar, which I think we also do at Microsoft quite well, is to say, okay, well, we've reached here, this is good, but what's next? Good is not good enough. What does the next stage look like? What do we need to get there? And then finally, just a very common thing, which kind of applies everywhere, but really focus on the kind of the recognition piece as well, which is, keep the morale up. So I think these are some of the things that I think you would do as a leader at this stage. I'm not sure if any of you other folks as leaders, if your teams have or are in this stage, if you apply any other strategies. Anyone wants to jump in? Okay, a very quiet group. I shouldn't schedule these calls after lunch, I think. It's a bit dangerous. Okay, I will carry on. Okay, so we'll get into step 4, which what we call is matching leadership style. And for those of you who have been on situational leadership, this will be a bit of a deja vu for you. So there's just a couple of things I want to cover. So the first thing, before you understand the kind of situational leadership model, is the two kind of what we call two leadership styles, which is directive leadership style and supportive leadership style. So I'm going to ask you as a group, and maybe let me now for the okay, a very quiet group. I shouldn't schedule these calls after lunch, I think. It's a bit dangerous. Okay, I will carry on. Okay, so we'll get into step 4, which what we call is matching leadership style. And for those of you who have been on situational leadership, this will be a bit of a deja vu for you. So there's just a couple of things I want to cover. So the first thing, before you understand the kind of situational leadership model, is the two kind of what we call two leadership styles, which is directive leadership style and supportive leadership style. So I'm going to ask you as a group, and maybe let me now for this purpose of the activity, let me actually pick from the list sort of randomly people. Okay, so Mr. Arman Demir, how would you describe a directive leadership style? What would that look like in action as you as a manager? Arman, you there? Okay, I'm going to go down the list. Claire Grubin?
I think a directive behavior would be very much telling a person what they need to do. So, and so sometimes you need to do that. You have to be very clear. This is the expectation, but it also means that you don't necessarily have that person's buy-in.
Yeah. So can you tell me what are some of the behaviors in you're absolutely spot on. So what would directive behavior actually look like? Like what would you be doing in a directive leadership style?
You'd be saying like, I was say, I actually did that today. I said, Jillian from EOH, she's one of our partners, please provide a letter from the customer giving the reason for the COCP by the end of day today so we can close the deal this month.
Okay.
So that's a very specific
pretty much
example.
It's a very close-ended
Yeah.
kind of statement, right? So directive leadership behavior is very close-ended, very narrow, it's pointed, it's kind of to the point, and it pretty much tells you what you need to do. Absolutely. Thanks for that, Claire. So just to kind of describe some of the other behaviors, so directive behavior is when you're providing direction. Often people perceive that, when I mention the word directive behavior, sometimes the examples will be negative, but that's not the case. Directive behavior has a lot of positive attributes, and the positive attributes are things like providing direction, things like helping people get organized, things like structuring things for people, educating them, and getting them to focus. So all of these things that are the positives of directive leadership style are absolutely valid and relevant, and things that you need to apply at different points in time. So let's move to understand supportive leadership behaviors. So let me go down the list again. Who's there? Eric Odipo. Eric, what would supportive leadership behavior look like? What does it look like, feel like?
Hi, Vish.
Hey.
Hi. So I think the supportive behavior, especially as opposed to directive, would be where you allow the employee more space to determine how to get the job done, but you are available to support as and when is required. So it would be more like a coaching, I would think more like a coaching environment than a telling environment.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks a lot for that. So you're right. Supportive, is obviously all about providing the support. It's, what you see is, you will start probably involving the person more. You will more encourage the person to find the answers and the solutions by probably asking the right questions instead of actually telling them. You'll probably do much more active listening and you want them to actually, through conversations with you, ideally come through solutions. So you become that sounding board, and it's much more collaboration. So if you think of this model again, directive leadership behaviors is more one-way communication. So it's you pretty much, going one way with the person and telling them what to do, what do they need to do, where can they get it, what's the template, how do you use it, what's the ROB, etc., etc. And they're just absorbing all of this. While supportive leadership behavior is a much more collaborative conversation. It's kind of, it's a two-way conversation constantly, and what you're probing is to help build competence and capability in the person for them to actually discover and find the answers themselves. And that brings me to the other point there is around over supervision and under supervision, and you'll see how all of this comes together. So again, a question back to the group. Let's see who's down the road on the call. I'm going to start now from the bottom. Trevor, if you're still around. What does over supervision look like, Trevor? So let's say, I'm just going to say this, Trevor, early in your career, when you were a young manager and you had another manager on top of you, when they over supervised you, what did it feel like?
So I think it's a classic case of micromanagement. Usually it's going to occur in a case when an individual has limited or no experience in a particular job environment. Mm-hmm. And the manager wants to look at the most finest detail, mm-hmm. right down to job element level, I guess you could call it, yeah. Mm-hmm. And keeps prodding, tell me this, tell me that, where's this, where's that, etc. So that has both, I guess, a positive and a negative connotation, because if a person is experienced enough to do the job, they really want you to focus on the outcomes, not on how and what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Trevor. Spot on. So that's over supervision for you. And what's under supervision feel like? Who's there? Sharif, Tawfiq, if you're still with us, can you think of a moment where you were under supervised, and what did that feel like?
Yeah, I think for the last 3 years I've been under supervised. So it's where totally hands-off approach in terms of management, total empowerment. So you literally let the direct report execute on his job. He's totally empowered, totally knows what he can do. So it's kind of that style.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great stuff. So thanks a lot for that, Sharif. So, as Trevor said, very rightly, it depends on the capability and on the situation. It can either be the right thing or it can be pretty painful. And that's where we come to the concept of match and mismatch. So match and mismatch basically says is that actually to be a great leader, you should match. Sometimes, if you don't understand and diagnose the development level of the person or of the team, you might end up applying the wrong leadership style in the wrong situation. So in this case, let's say in Trevor's case, he probably sort of felt that he knew what he wants to do and how he needs to do it, and he was quite capable. But if his manager over-supervised him to the finest of detail, he probably felt quite suffocated. While on the other hand, if you're under-supervised, it's actually you want direction, you want to know more, you want your manager to get more involved, you want a little bit more of that over-supervision, but the manager is more like, hey, you're on the job, that's why I recruited you, you're a strong talent, you can do it, kind of stuff, and off you go. And then, you're kind of just standing there looking there and saying, well, I get no direction at all. So, both scenarios are pretty dangerous places to be in. And if you think of yourself in those situations and then click out of that and think of employees in your teams currently or historically going through that with you as a manager, it can be pretty dangerous. For your leadership equity, your leadership brand in their eyes, if you're actually doing this, what I call mismatching the leadership style. So let's look at how these two dimensions of directive and supportive come together in the model. So once again, for those who've been on situational leadership, this might be a bit of a deja vu, but let me run through a quick recap anyway. So the first, as you can see on the X and the Y axis, we have the supportive leadership behavior going from low to high. Once again, remember that supporting leadership behavior is about involving, providing support, encouraging, much more two-way collaboration, listening skills, etc. So you can see it goes from low to high, and the directive leadership behavior also goes from low on the left to high on the right, and that involves things like organizing, structuring, educating, and getting people to be focused, telling them what to do, how to do, where to do it from, etc. And in this quadrant, as you can see, it breaks up into 4, and there are 4 leadership styles that are born out of the confluence of these two behaviors. So we have something called the S1, which is called directing leadership style. That is someone who needs high directive behavior and low supportive behavior. Typically, you would use an S1 style for someone who's new to a goal or task, is new to an organization. They need to know a lot of detail, so they start ramping up really effectively. Style 2 is called coaching style. That's a tough one because it has a combination of high direction and high support. So it's kind of highs on both, right? So you got to really put a lot of energy into establishing that coaching style after you provided high direction. Style 3 is called supporting leadership style, which is a combination of low direction and much more higher supportive behavior. So this is much more easier to do. You're stepping back a bit more. The person is becoming much more competent at what they're doing, and you pretty much just keep checking in with them to make sure they're not going to derail at any point in the future. And then finally, the curve ends at the bottom on the left at style 4, which is what we call delegating leadership style. And that is a combination of low direction and low support. Often managers think that this actually involves no direction, which is NO. It's actually not no direction and no support, it's low direction, because sometimes managers just check out and they feel, okay, I've got a high performer, he knows what he needs to do, I'm not going to have, they don't have one-on-ones, they don't connect, and that can also be pretty damaging even to a high performer, because even high performers have the need for the manager to check in, see how they're doing, are there any obstacles that need to be removed, and kind of plan the way forward. So you do need to give attention even to someone who's a very high performer and is sitting at that green quadrant. And in terms of how all of this comes together for the team development stages is as follows. So now you can see the link between matching the right leadership style for the right team development phase. So while situational leadership is more about one-on-one relationship with your employees, the team development stage says, well, you might also have some overarching team development stages for some of your sub-teams in your larger team, if you're quite a senior guy, and you can assess that and actually use the correct leadership style to match with the development level. I'm just going to freeze here for a couple of minutes. Any questions from you guys? I went through a lot here. Is this getting clearer and clearer? We're almost at the end. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, and then finally moving on to stage 5, which, there's no real content here, but it's really around developing the strategy for high team performance. So again, going back into the Microsoft environment, MS Poll is live. You're going to get some data very soon. Put it in the mix. Put it in this mix. Look at these 4 steps that I've shared with you. Put it in the mix with the MS Poll data. Think about your team charter. Set some time aside, if you want to prep around that, and set up some time, maybe half a day or whatever it is, with your team. Sometimes managers like to combine this with like an offsite, so they do half a day of work and then spend 2 or 3 hours doing another activity. But this is really a good sort of a toolkit and a process to to your team at a point in time, and then I would suggest kind of do a bit of an interim check-in in about 6 months' time. If it's norms, then you can actually you can do it every quarter, and then do a big check-in overall in 6 months, and then again at the next cycle at the end of a year, when you get your next MS poll results, put it back in the mix, do a perform gap analysis again, relook at your team charter, think about your purpose, if the purpose has shifted, look at your norms and values of, the top 10 that you identified last year, how many of those are you actually walking and talking and that have become part of your normal behaviors as team members that you actually need to drop them off and maybe bring some more in. Okay, so again, I'm going to pause there for a second. I mean, we're good on time, so let this marinate in your mind for a couple of secs. Any other questions? I see you're going to get a copy of this. Yeah, you should have the booklets from your HR folks. If you don't, you can take a walk and pick it up from them. This session is being recorded, so you can always replay it at a future stage once you have the books with you. And you can also reach out to some of your HR folks if they're on this call right now. And I still see you got another slide here. And yeah, again, just a couple of kind of, if I can say, parting tips. Flexibility is the ability to use a variety of different leadership styles. So that is very, very important. Sort of years ago, sort of it was always, this is my leadership style, and this is how I am as a leader. And for the last couple of years, I've always been telling leaders, your inability to apply flexibility in your leadership style is directly proportional to the success of your team. And I've often had this. I mean, very recently, I've been working with a leader where he's been having a challenge with one of his employees, and he really has to flex his leadership style to become much more directive and coaching with the person, because kind of by nature and by style, he's quite an S4 leader, and to his luck, his team is pretty much a very capable team, and he's got a new person on board, and he just needs to flex his leadership style. He cannot just say, I've recruited you, you're good talent, you'll figure it out, etc., etc. You really need to get into the S1 and the S2 mode. So that's just a tip for you. The other one is around a great quote. It's by Blanchard. It's, situation leadership is about providing different strokes for the same folks depending on the goal or task. And here really the message that I want to share with you is that don't label people, don't box them in. If you think of the cheetah and the deer picture that we started off with, that also demonstrated the fact that we often are very quick to judge. And from this model, hopefully what you get is that people go through cycles. The same person can be really good at one goal or task, and they can be at a completely different stage at another goal or task. And that means that your entire team dynamics continuously change over time. And then finally, again for you, it's all about the quality and frequency of conversations with your people over a period of time. So, again, be close to your people. If you're in virtual teams, that will ultimately impact your leadership brand, the quality and frequency of conversations you have with them. And then finally, yeah, just my last slide is this lovely picture of the roller coaster. And just again to tell you, we spoke about kind of the ROB that you could use around, big checkpoints once a year. You can do a mid-year checkpoint, and then quarterly you could go into things like the norms and values and follow that. But building the momentum to start with and then maintaining the momentum to make sure your team constantly stays where you want it to be is ultimately your responsibility, and that's something that you control this roller coaster ride. You control, and you need to kind of look out for, when's the team going up, when are they falling down, if they're falling down, how do you pick them up again? And that's it from me. Again, I'm here for Q&A. Any questions? You guys have been awfully quiet. The HR folks on the call, any comments from you guys?
Hi Vish, it's Efrai. Thank you for your time. I just want to mention that the Israeli team done that training, face to face in Israel a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that we've done it, in a closed room with real examples are very, very important for each one of the segments actually, because it's different. There is the theoretical model, but there is, the actual tools they can get and gain from that training that you mentioned now. So I think, first of all, we got an amazing feedbacks from the field. Mm-hmm. And I do encourage everyone to do it, to use it as a tool on daily basis and also to use current examples, not just to keep it at the model stage.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you. Anyone else? Any final thoughts? Anything that you think that might be something you might get stuck with, kind of landing this with your team? All right. Then, Linda, I think we're good to wrap up. Helen?
Yes, so thank you, a huge thank you to Vish for putting this together. I think all of us had some great learnings again. I want to reassure you that everyone's going to get their booklets, and once you have your booklets and the deck, you actually have everything available to go and deliver some sessions in your team. So if you need more help, please reach out to the HR team or to Vish directly or to Helen or myself. And a huge thank you, Vish, for making this time. It was a great discussion.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining and investing your time in this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.